This is PwC's vision for analytics and AI transformation, an end-to-end solution that can empower your business to extract more value from your data. Whether you're in the business of developing cutting-edge products or trying to help provide customers with next-level service or fishing, we can team with you, helping you harness your own sea of data and fueling your bottom line.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Jean-Pascal Chauvet. I'm a strategy consultant at Ab Initio Software. And here I'm a track producer for the MIT CDOIQ 2022 Track 6. And this is the first session of Track 6. Now, Track 6 is about the CDOIQ toolkit, which is about data catalogs, AI, ML, data analytics, visualization, security, privacy, and sensitive data, and cloud computing platform. That's the focus for the next 3 days. A bit of housekeeping on this session. First is that it's being recorded and will be available. The recording will be available in a couple of months. Second is that there will be a Q&A session at the end. So feel free to submit all your questions via the Whova platform or the Whova app on your phone in the Q&A tab. And in this session, we are going to have polls. And so the polls are going to come through the Whova platform as well in the poll tab. Now, the topic of this session is maximizing return, automating contract pricing data into business intelligence. And we have both Sathya Srinivasan, director at PwC, as well as George Painumkal, senior director at iCertis, to take us through this session. A warm welcome to both of you gentlemen. Sathya, over to you.
Thank you, JP. Thank you for joining this presentation, everyone. We are happy to have you over here. My name is Sathya Srinivasan. I'm a director in the PwC's Analytics and Insights practice, and I have focused on intelligent information management for the last 20 plus years, helping clients understand, organize, extract, and gain insights from unstructured and semi-structured content that's often buried in documents, records, digital assets, and contracts. I have led engagements in integrating such systems with structured data counterparts and business intelligence solutions for reporting and visualization. I'm happy to walk you through this presentation, and I have with me my co-presenter, George Painumkal from iCertis, a leading contract lifecycle management provider. George, over to you for introductions.
Hello, everyone. I'm George Painumkal, Senior Director of Product Management. Again, welcome to the event, whether you're watching live or if you will be watching a recording later. I've been at iCertis for about 3 years, and I own product adoption. And as such, a key part of my role is to look at how we use AI to increase user adoption and how AI solutions that we implement within our contract management platform are easy to use within the common workflows that our users use, versus feeling like a bolted on attached offering. So welcome, looking forward to this session.
Okay. George, do you want to take away on this slide?
Yes. Are you presenting the slide? I don't see it right now. I don't know if other attendees are able to see it.
All right, that becomes our first issue.
We can't see the slide, Sathya.
There we go.
Okay, right. Now they're on.
Perfect. Okay, so first off, let's just set the stage for why contracts. I mean, a contract lifecycle management, contract management, and AI. It's not typically what comes to mind, right? When you think about the uses of AI, or even why even think about contract management? When you really think about it, contracts govern every dollar that goes in and out of a business, right? So whether it is your relationship with your vendors, with your customers, your suppliers, whatever it is, whether you're a small business that deals with dozens of contracts or large businesses, like many of our customers actually deal with tens of thousands and even millions of contracts. Now, within those contracts, when you think about the structure of it, you may have basic information, in that document, like party information, clauses like force majeure, payment terms, attributes like pricing, or addresses even, and then signatures at the end of it. Now, a single contract can be 3-4 pages, or it can actually be hundreds of pages. And within this are buried all the contractual and execution details that then govern your relationships with your suppliers, for example, relationships with your employees, your financials. And each of these commitments or obligations in a contract or the entitlements, all of these govern what your execution across a single business relationship would be. Now you take that and you multiply it by thousands or hundreds of thousands of relationships across your businesses and the many contracts that govern it. There is a lot of rich data that is buried in these contracts that can be utilized for negotiations, for compliance, for risk assurance, just to name a few. Sathya?
All right. So before we get into the meat of it, we have an initial poll for you. JP, if you don't mind starting the poll, you'd like to get a quick pulse, and then we'll get into the details.
So I just fired the poll on the Hoover platform. This is the first poll of the first session. So hopefully everyone in the audience is getting a pop-up that you can click and reply on these questions. Okay, I can see that there are some answers that are coming. Not many answers, Sathya. I see 2 answers.
All right, we'll start with 2, and hopefully there'll be more engagement as we keep going. Oh, there are more. So really, we want to get an understanding in terms of what your current journey is. I know when people talk about contracts, in this particular audience, the thought process might be there is a data contracts. So here we are talking about contracts between organizations, and that codifies pricing and all sorts of details that eventually need to be fulfilled.
So Sathya, what we have several answers. The in progress already implemented. The last option is 60% of the answers. Across the other 3 is 15% distributed equally. So it looks like everyone is in progress or already implemented.
Okay, that is really good to know. So hopefully a lot of these things that we are going to talk about would resonate with you. And we will share some of the details based on our experiences in terms of where we have seen such implementations to be successful, where we have seen value to be gained from some of those implementations. That is really the core of our presentation today. Thanks, JP, on that one. As I mentioned, contracts, and we don't mean data contracts that are exchanges between data providers and data consumers over here, but real business contracts that are legally binding between 2 organizations or even intercompany. They form the bedrock of all business transactions. They codify obligations that embed pricing, legally binding commitments with another party. Most often, these contracts are seen as a means to an end. Right, so they are a necessary evil that must be completed so that you can get to the sale. And normally they are often forgotten unless a question is essentially raised at a later point in time. However, the data that is embedded within these contracts can provide strategic advantages to a company. They often codify what the final pricing of a particular commitment is. They talk about the penalties that can potentially be incurred by a particular company if the contract is not fulfilled in a timely manner, or discounts that could be availed if the contract commitment can be fulfilled in advance or early on. And such information is normally managed either ad hoc or typically managed manually And this leads to a lot of revenue leakage and suboptimal cost management that could easily be avoided. Typically, the data that we extract out of these contracts is only a small portion, right? So this is what you see is the tip of the iceberg over here. This is the explicit metadata that is normally captured related to a particular contract document. And these would typically be your standard information like an expiration date or the vendor information, or maybe this the overall contract price. And that information that is captured even in an ad hoc or manual manner may not be consistent over time. Companies that are a little bit more mature might be capturing these details or digitizing these contracts using OCR and ICR technologies. At least it's in a digitized format that could be searched. But often those contracts end up in shared drives or some simplified storage solutions, which makes it extremely hard to search across these contracts or within these contracts in terms of what they are. Not to mention any of the more detailed analysis that can actually happen through semantic analysis or AI mechanisms. Because of this, this contract that we see, the visibility to the contracts that we see is only a small portion of the overall picture that you can get out of these contracts. There is a lot more data than what meets the eye, and that can be harnessed through technology, and it can reduce the amount of contextual analysis that humans need to perform on it. But contracts are sensitive, right? So there is often pushback that if I don't want to be exposing contracts to everybody within the company, because what if they basically take it and they might use it for nefarious purposes, or use it in a way that is not appropriate, and hence there tends to be a tendency to essentially keep it within a legal or a procurement department and only provide that information on a need-to-know basis. However, secure visibility to the contract will democratize the insight generation that you can have. The insight that can be obtained from these contracts can be in different perspectives, in different ways. That would be extremely valuable for business teams and for other shared services that are within an organization. So when you do that, that is really where the power of these contract lifecycle management solutions provide, and they essentially bring to the picture. So that leads us to the next topic, or the poll that we would want to ask you. We heard earlier that a number of you are in progress of implementing your CLM solution or have already implemented CLM solution. So we'd love to understand what are the metrics that you are currently evaluating or you're looking to evaluate in terms of getting insights from your contract system.
So if you can all go in the poll tab on the Hoover platform, I just fired this poll, and let's wait a few moments to get some results.
And along the way, if you do have any questions, please drop it on the platform so that we can address them towards the end as well.
I'm not seeing answers coming through. Mayes, do you see any on the results? I don't seem to see any answer.
We have one result.
All right.
Oh, here we go. Now it's coming. Okay, there are a few that are coming, Sathya.
Awesome.
Sounds like the standardization second answer is the bigger one, and then the cost payment analysis
Okay.
No metrics and no metrics specified come next. But the majority is really on the second one, the standardization.
Excellent. And that's great, no, and it's definitely not uncommon, because most of the time the first value that people expect to realize from a contract management solution is to standardize terms and standardize legal language across the contracts. But hopefully, as you will see further down during this particular session, that is the tip of the iceberg from a metrics management perspective. But establishing that can definitely be extremely helpful in terms of getting to more higher value metrics, such as commitments in terms of upcoming milestones and payments, cost and payment analysis, as well as in improving the overall productivity across contracts.
Yeah, I think, Sathya,
yes.
On that point, I think a couple of the key things to keep in mind here is also, how do we do this at scale, right? So each of these items, if you have an infinite set of resources, sure, you can go through every contract and grab all the terms and everything. But when we're talking about thousands of contracts or tens of thousands and even hundreds of contracts, to be able to take all the data in there and actually catalog it so that you can use it later. So this is beyond scanning a contract in and just being able to do some simple OCR and searching. This is about identifying what is in the contract, what is it speaking to, and cataloging it so that you can use it downstream, whether to build more efficiency, whether to understand your risk profile, whatever it is. But all of that data is in the contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. And wrong window. A well-implemented contract solution, as George mentioned, that is, if it is properly implemented, is not just useful for the legal and the procurement department, as you provided in your polls for standardizing the terms and conditions, but also for all business units that are bound by the contractual terms. Because again, contracts don't just apply to legal and procurement, they facilitate it, but the actual use is actually done by the business units. So this really, the CLM solution can really help you to get a 360 view of the contract. And that involves 4 components typically. You look inside the contract to see what are all the obligations that are in a contract and that may need to be tracked. So looking inside can provide that insight into the contract terms and conditions that may need to be complied with. Looking across the contract to see what are the obligations or terms across the client or a product portfolio. And we'll share some examples on that particular front. To see what is happening with a particular vendor or maybe even suite of vendors. Looking forward to stay ahead of upcoming events that can be handled proactively. What are the milestones that I need to pay for? What are the obligations that I need to comply with? And then finally, looking back to analyze patterns across executed contracts quickly with minimal and manual effort. And this is, as George mentioned, this can be a non-trivial exercise, especially if there are hundreds and thousands of contracts in a typical organization. It becomes impossible to basically go through all of those contract details without some significant technical assistance on that front. So with that, let's dive a little deeper into what each of these areas are. So George, do you want to start by giving some examples in terms of looking back and looking inside these contracts? I think you're on mute.
All right, thank you. So when we talk about looking back, as Sathya mentioned, what are we looking for? We're looking at all the various terms that we have accepted and are regulating our historical relationships, whether it be with our suppliers, whether it be with our customers. So as an example of, where we used AI to help one of our customers in the real world plug revenue leakage was, for a very large professional services company that works with us, they had come into a situation where a number of their very senior resources were being billed out at a much lower rate than what was what it should have been for their level in the organization. And using AI and looking across all of their client relationships, they were able to discover the contracts whereby named resources were identified in the contracts against a specific bill rate. What had happened is many of these resources over the relationship had since been promoted, but their bill rates had never updated. And now we're talking about analyzing hundreds of client relationships and hundreds of contracts across those client relationships for them. And utilizing this, the AI solution, along with contract lifecycle management, they were able to quickly identify all of the contracts where named resources were set to specific bill rates to help them understand which resources they had levers to be able to utilize at the accepted bill rate for a given client relationship, thus plugging a big source of revenue leakage for that organization as an example of looking back on historical contracts. Sathya, you want to talk about looking forward?
Yeah, and maybe one other example, since we seem to have some time also, I would add on the looking back is, one of the recent trends that we are seeing, or recent impetus that we are seeing for contract is also political events or external events that might actually change how companies are looking at their contractual obligations. So recently we have had situations such as the COVID pandemic situation, or political issues that are happening in other parts of the world, that in turn tend to have an indirect impact in terms of how people manage their contracts. So what we often see is there is a need gets triggered to say, hey, can you look at all of my contracts historically with the force majeure clause and tell me whether I have any provision from a pandemic perspective? Or there could be another situation like, can I look at all the contracts that are currently active and see if I have any business that is going on with a geopolitically troubled area, so that I need to take some action on that. Such queries that often come from business are not that trivial to essentially answer if you don't have the right technological support that are there for managing these contracts in a central place that you can quickly get to those answers. Looking forward, some of the areas that we see, an example that I can provide is essentially getting structured information out of these contracts so that they can be triaged with additional information that is essentially coming out of other systems such as pricing systems and financial systems. For example, we implemented CLM in a large healthcare organization where the need was essentially to take the information from the contract, marry it against their pricing systems and their spend analysis systems, and to reconcile what the price terms are, what the targets are, and for the carve-outs that are essentially embedded within these contracts. And most often these contract terms are fairly complex in nature in terms of how many carve-outs are there, what are the scenarios with respect to that carve-out, and then compare that against how they were essentially distributed or how they were essentially fulfilled downstream to see whether there was discrepancies or whether it is happening appropriately as per the terms and conditions that are mentioned in the particular contract. And that led to essentially them identifying areas where there could have been, they might have ended up having to pay penalties because they just didn't realize that they had to fulfill things in a certain way, or to avoid revenue leakage because there were certain discounts that did not have to be paid, or that were paid incorrectly, that they could essentially claw back from by comparing the contract information against the downstream systems. So then switching to the next one in terms of looking across, this is again an often frequent scenario that we end up finding with CLM solutions, where there are queries that need to be done, or checks that need to be done on a frequent basis. And recently, one of my clients came with a question to say, "Hey, because of the inflation that is happening right now, can you please tell me what are all my contracts that have a tie into consumer pricing index so that I can essentially take some action?" A query like that would not have been as trivial if a CLM solution were not there. And because we actually implemented a solution in this particular scenario, ISODIS being that solution actually, the query was actually answered within a few minutes. And we were able to identify 400 odd contracts that they would need to look at on a priority basis and then potentially take some action. So those are some of the examples where having the contracts in a centralized solution and with a strong searchability, with strong metadata that is embedded on top of them, can help in getting those answers very quickly, which then can lead to some significant cost savings or cost avoidance. Do you want, Josh, do you want to wrap this up with looking inside, and we'll respond to a question that came up?
Yeah. So, when we think about looking inside, it's really looking at, and again, all of this is at scale. How do you look inside your various contract structures? And this will vary when you're on the buy side or the sell side of a contract. So understanding discrepancy with, clauses, like, do you have standardized clauses? Do you have clauses with large amounts of variation? And all the variation you see in these all amount to churn and time to value. The more time you have to spend negotiating, the more time you have to spend redlining contracts, the more time it takes to actually get to business value. And then looking across, it is hard at scale to understand what is your risk profile. How do you look across and negotiate better positions if you don't understand all of the data across your vast repository of contracts? See, there's a lot of efficiency value and consistency and risk reduction in being able to do looking inside your contracts at scale. As an example, one of our customers, a very large manufacturing company, their contracts that they had entered into were very long duration. So we're talking about 30-year duration contracts is what they were entering into with multiple vendors. So you can imagine how contracts evolve over that time. So they were quite stuck on being able to look across all of these contracts, right? A lot of it involved manually tracking contract milestones. Anytime an issue came up, having to dig up these contracts and looking through and identifying where the problem was, what kind of contractual levers they had available to them. And then using AI, we were able to process over 120,000 legacy contracts and then catalog it to catalog the specific attributes, the clauses, the tables, and add rule-based processing to it to help the customer be able to look across a vast repository of even legacy contracts, which often, when you bring AI into the picture, or even with CLM, people don't think, people might look, let's look into the future. Let's store all of our contracts and let's think about standardizing our workflows and all of that in the future. But there is so much business value buried in those contracts. And AI can help bring all of those to catalog that and bring it into life and help companies with their negotiations and their overall contracting profiles.
So I do have a couple of questions. So John, should we take them right now or wait for the QA?
It's really, if it fits in the flow of the presentation, let's do
Yes.
them now. If not, then we have time for the Q&A. So it's really your call, Sathya.
Got it. Let me actually take two of the questions because I do feel that it actually fits in the particular flow. I did want to touch upon the first one, which specifically was talking about how do you measure return? Because we are talking about KPIs and we are talking about measuring information. And that's a very important question. So most often, from a PwC perspective, we end up coming into projects where clients are looking to us for helping establish a business case for a CLM solution, or at least to validate the business case if that is already in progress, or to refine that before subsequently implementing it. At a higher level, I think there are three broad buckets that we have seen the business value to be categorized. So the first one is from a productivity perspective. This is a simpler but harder to measure bucket, I would say, which normally ends up into how much time is essentially being spent by the legal department or the procurement department in terms of answering questions, or the churn it essentially takes for a contract to get executed. One part of that could simply be productivity improvement. Are you freeing up your resources to actually do higher value work so that they can actually get more value for the money, and not reducing that particular time. The second component on that productivity is reducing the cycle time of a contract, especially in certain departments or certain organizations. Reducing the cycle time of a contract from, let's say, 3 weeks to 3 days means the money can actually start coming in earlier into the organization than when it would have happened if it took just like a month to essentially go and negotiate a particular contract. So there is an indirect value in terms of getting the getting the money early on. The second bucket is in terms of revenue leakage. This is what we were talking about earlier, where there is money that is not being captured because people are not aware of the contractual terms and conditions, and as a result, that revenue is essentially going away because there is a discount that you could have availed, or there could be other mechanisms where you could have optimized the money. Example that George mentioned, there might be a heavy reliance on a vendor just because there are historic contracts for 30 years that have potentially suboptimal language that might be leading to money getting lost. That could have been optimized if better visibility is there. And if somebody is looking at it and say, why am I spending so much money on this particular vendor, for example? The last bucket would be cost avoidance. This is where you have certain obligations with respect to the contracts, and if someone is not monitoring that, they might be paying penalties or they might be paying fees that they could have avoided had they better visibility to what the contractual terms and conditions are. These are the broad buckets. The one tricky component in CLM that we have seen is most often there isn't a benchmark that you can go with, especially for the first one. People don't know how much time they are wasting or spending in terms of trying to find information. So what we sometimes do is to help do a quick exercise, either through a survey or even through a short analysis, to set up some baseline in terms of where the time is getting lost, so that you can then measure the return of value from a CLM solution. Similarly, we look at the past 1 year or a few months, or even some specific set of contracts to see where there could be value. Analyzing those contracts, high value contracts or high risk contracts, can then help essentially justify the return on investment on CLM solutions. And often that can be actually pretty big. George, anything to add there on that question before we?
Sathya, you actually you rounded out really well. It really depends on where are the areas where the CLM is being deployed. So when it is, if it's a performance impact like efficiency, yes, it is kind of easiest to talk about, but sometimes tough to measure. We know with AI involvement, we've seen significant improvements in performance, even in the intake of simple contracts. You get third-party contracts coming in, and just taking in all of it and being able to catalog it, we've seen improvements of over 80% in time savings. In terms of, actually, one of my favorite examples is, a large electronics retailer who's a customer of ours was using or is using CLM, our CLM platform, to process their rebates. And, when you're running rebate programs with thousands or tens of thousands of active rebates that are going out to end customers, each of those is attached to a contract. And this electronics retailer was able to reduce their turnaround time on processing these contracts by 70%. So it really depends on which area you're looking at and how you're measuring.
All right. So let's keep moving, and then we'll come to a few other questions that I've queued up towards the end during the Q&A. So as we've talked about a lot of the benefits of the need for a CLM solution, and I know some of you are already implementing this. So hopefully you're convinced at this particular point in terms of the importance of a contract management solution. One thing that we have seen, especially in the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years, is that contract information and contracting solutions have evolved from a legal concern, where it was more about sourcing management, contract lifecycle management, like authoring a contract, negotiating a contract and executing a contract, and maybe managing some basic terms like when are my contracts expiring so that I can take some action on it, with some simple integrations with single sign-on systems or e-signature solutions, to an enterprise concern. So this is not just your departmental concern anymore. It has become an enterprise concern, and contract has become a new system of record and a data source that organizations have started taking seriously due to the value and the hidden gems that are essentially embedded within these contracts. So when we look at this enterprise view of a contract management solution, it is not just a standalone product anymore. It fits within a broader ecosystem connecting both upstream and downstream to your customer relationship management systems like Salesforce, where there is where either the contract requests are initiated tied to the account and opportunity details, and then on the other side, essentially feeding the data, the terms and conditions, and the obligations that are embedded within these contracts into ERP systems such as SAP to provide the pricing information, invoice information, payment details, and tying that against transactions and seeing how they fare. They also often get connected to bespoke solutions or third-party systems like third-party risk management solutions or other line of business solutions to see what is the vendor risk of all the contracts that I have, and if I flag a vendor, can I automatically tie that to my contract solution so that any new contract that essentially is coming up can be handled appropriately, or I can change my risk language so that I'm better protected in those situations. So that is why this has evolved much more into an enterprise system. And as a result, it also brings a lot of complexities and care that needs to be given as an enterprise solution as well. The key considerations that we end up having to uncover with our clients when we implement CLM solutions, especially when it comes to data transactions back and forth, is what is the source of truth for the data. One common mistake that we often see is that because contract management solution happens to be in the middle in this particular picture, there is often an emphasis placed on, let everything be coming from a contract management solution. And that can lead to challenges because CLM solutions are really, really good in managing terms and conditions. They are really good in managing the contractual risk and the obligations. So it becomes important to understand what should be the source of truth for different data points. It might make sense to have CLM provide the contractual details, marry that up with pricing details from other systems or invoice and payment details from other systems, and then figuring out how to essentially tie all of these three pieces together to get that 360 view. So understanding that source of truth and appropriately making those integration tends to result in a very effective and efficient overall architecture on the system. This also leads way to standardizing the data. Most often when you implement a contract management solution, it exposes inefficiencies or inconsistencies in the system, like the account data is not necessarily accurate, or the vendor opportunities are not always created for different contracts. So looking at that overall ecosystem helps in building the overall data consistency in an organization as well. George, anything to add here before I switch to the next slide?
Yeah, I think the key things to think about here are outside of the contract management platform, what business processes do you have today at which at some point will generate a contract or utilize a contract? So the CRM is a very obvious one. You can convert opportunities to relationships in Salesforce that will require a contract. But across your platform, across your business processes, there might be areas where contracts are generated. What are those? Do you have those cataloged? The other thing to think about is all the data that is in your contracts. What are all the various systems or the business processes today where that data could be utilized? Right. See, contracts data have always been the critical repository of business information, right? I mean, they've always been critical. However, CLMs today are finally enabling customers to utilize the data in the contracts at scale to really realize the full intent of the contract terms and to optimize future contracts from there.
Excellent point. And as George is alluding to this one also, this is a journey. This is not a one-step process where you have no contract solution and suddenly you have everything already available. And what we see is that this journey has a few steps that need to be crossed in order to provide that efficiency across the system. As I mentioned, implementing a CLM solution often exposes inconsistencies and inefficiencies in an engagement. The foundational capabilities, for example, generally tend to expose inefficiencies that might be in an organization historically, like contracts are not maintained, no versioning, no audit control, search is not efficient, etc. So it tends to show where things are not effective. And even as George was mentioning, sometimes people don't even know how many types of contracts that they actually have because they have just historically collected so many templates with so many variations that can be optimized fairly significantly in CLM solutions. Most often, that is our first big effort to just understand what are the contract types, and we end up finding that there are 55 different variations of a particular contract type. Contract that could be simplified into just one or two. That efficiency can be done right at the beginning. Then once that is done, then it tends to expose the intermediate capabilities, tend to expose the inconsistencies within the contracting processes. So this could be the terms and conditions, as was mentioned in the poll earlier. The terms are not effectively used. Everybody is using an old version of a template, for example, or a higher risk language that was replaced with the lower risk language, but nobody realizes that, and so they start using that anyway, and that puts the overall organization at risk. Or people are not signing in the right way, or the person with the right authority is actually not signing the contract in the correct manner, or it hasn't gone through the right approval processes, leading to high risk. Those are the process inefficiencies or inconsistencies. Even though there might be a policy in place, it is about following that policy that is exposed. Once these two are set up, then the third part is really where the true value of contracts come in. And this is where the power of AI, the power of integrations can truly bring high value, where you can connect all the data components together, connect the pricing information together, and really make business decisions on where can I create higher efficiency contracts, where can I create better language or better terms that are profitable for me. And that's really where the CLM solutions tend to really shine and really provide high value once you get past that initial stages.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would add to that, Sathya, is to your point about it being a journey, right? It's important for especially for groups that are bringing in a contract management solution to help bring all of their business units along, and it's important to paint that future vision for them, because generally what we've seen is that different business units at companies, they have different business relationships. They might be on the buy side, they might be on the sell side. As such, their execution is different. So the way you would implement it might differ from business unit to business unit, and it helps to help them understand the benefits that they individually will get as a business unit as they look towards the future, as you go through the various opportunities in the journey for contract lifecycle management.
Absolutely. So we are getting towards the end over here. So we'll touch upon a few points, and then we'll switch over to the Q&A. So the last set that we wanted to emphasize over here is that most often it's not the evolution in the industry is not visible to a lot of organizations. CLM solutions have come a really long way, and especially they have grown exponentially in the last few years. So what used to be more of a departmental concern or a local concern has now become that enterprise concern, and the technology has caught up with that. So we have seen, as George mentioned throughout the presentation, AI has started playing a key role in CLM solutions in terms of augmenting the core capabilities that a contract management solutions provide. More and more integrations have become commonplace now. Earlier, it used to be just like one or two integrations with Salesforce or ERP systems, but now there are tens, if not hundreds, of adapters that are starting to come in play. CLM solutions have also become more API first, so that they not only provide the capabilities within the product, but also understand that these need to be extended in ways that may not have been envisioned by the solution itself, and provide those hooks that can be leveraged in an enterprise capacity. And last but not the least, the integration with business intelligence solutions as well. So this is where the data from contracts are easily available for export that can then be tied to other systems, and the visualizations can actually be enabled from that integration of data between multiple systems. All right. So with that, we have a couple of closing poll questions. If John, if you can enable that. They are related to each other, so you'll see two questions happening one after the other that touch upon, now that we have walked you through the contract maturity, we would like to understand, where your maturity stands and your use of AI.
So I have opened the poll, everyone. If you can go to the poll tab on Hoover and then click on where you think you are in terms of maturity around contracts. Looks like the result take a little time to come, maybe a minute or so. So Sathya, George, if there is any comment around this before we get the results, go right ahead.
Okay. Maybe I'll just take on one question that came up earlier. There was a comment about OCR solutions, what OCR tools are typically used. So I would answer that in two parts, right? So one is most of these CLM solutions provide inbuilt OCR capabilities, and on top of that, more importantly, also provide AI capabilities that can essentially not just digitize the contract, but also extract metadata from these contracts. An example in this case, maybe George, you can explain the Discover AI capability within iCertis, and then I'll touch upon the common OCRs.
Yeah, so with Discover AI, right, like the OCR is basically, I think, the base of all of it, right? Because it's provided by, I think most CLMs will provide it, but it's really about once you identify what the various, what you're reading, right? Because in a contract, you might have just the plain text of a contract, you have various clauses, attributes, but attached to that, you have various annexures, you might have associated documents, you might have pricing tables. It's really about, now that you've done OCR, what is this? What are these characters that we have optically recognized? And semantically understanding what that is and cataloging it in a way so that it's actually useful to you for reporting and for analysis. And that's what Discover AI actually does.
All right. And that is true. And the one caveat I would put on that one is it requires the setup, right? Like that foundation, once that is established, that helps to unleash the power of these AI capabilities to understand what are the classes that are in there, understand what are the attributes that are in there. The most common examples that we see are to get legacy contracts into a CLM solution. So a product like Discover AI and iCertis can be really helpful there to do that in bulk. And then also to look into how the classes come up, especially when there is a third-party paper that is essentially coming into the picture. What are the contracts? What does the other party mention in terms of certain classes? How does that compare to my standard terms and conditions? And what do I need to do about that? Is there a risk that is involved, etc.? So that is really where the power of these OCR and AI solutions that sit on the OCR solutions come into play.
Yeah, I think Sathya, it's a really good point about the third party, because if you've got a templatized solution today, you can build and contracts and query on your own contracts, but what do you do when you're dealing with a large number of third-party contracts, all of which could be in a different structure? To be able to identify those various clauses and match that to your library clauses and see how they compare is a great example of how iCertis Discover AI helps intake and structure that data that comes in.
Okay.
So on the third poll, by far all contracts in a centralized location with some metadata, but how to search across contract. The second option was by far the where the most answers were.
Got it.
And I've just fired for everyone. I've just fired the last poll number 4 on AI. So if you can go to the poll tab and answer that one, that would be great.
I didn't even realize that this actually ties very well to the question as well, right? Like this
Yeah.
is exactly what we are talking about right now. And more often we do see that people don't yet leverage AI or haven't fully leveraged AI, and that's okay. But the key is to understand the value and the potential. And as the foundations are set up, it becomes a lot easier to then apply the more complex solutions and get more value out of the investment that you make on a CLM product. Okay. Yep, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we have a few answers on the AI side, split between we do not use AI and the OCR and extracting metadata from legacy contract for migration. So far we have a few answers split between these two.
All right, and to tie that back, the middle two are really where the higher value is, right? So the more common example is to do exactly what we saw in the poll. But once you start analyzing the class language for risk and for the obligations, that is really where you're starting to unlock the potential of a contract lifecycle management system and get the data out of the system. So I know we are close to time here. So we'll just touch upon a few examples in this particular case. We talked about the looking forward and looking inside, etc. These are some examples in terms of how this actually comes into play in iCertis. Josh, do you want to take like just a few seconds to just run through these?
Yeah. So what you're looking at here, right? It's simply and just for the audience who might not be familiar with iCertis, we've got a web platform, but knowing how much legal, procurement, and many functions operate inside Word, we also enable our contract management functionality inside Microsoft Word. So what you're looking at here is, in the case of a single document, right, a single agreement that comes in, you can run AI analysis on it and start to immediately catalog what are all the various clauses and attributes that are present in here. From there, we have AI-enabled playbooks, where the playbook will identify where certain attributes are, where certain payment terms, for example, fall outside of our standard language, and it will actually provide suggestions as to what the historical payment terms have been, or you can impose a structure around it and say that we will accept net 30 or net 45, but not around that. So you can actually enable your legal playbooks that you might have in your organization and embed it using AI. And from there, you can then take all of the contracts that have come in over time, whether it's through the Microsoft Word experience or through Discover AI or through batch processing, and start to generate aggregate reports that help you look across your contracting landscape. Could we go to the next slide, Sathya?
Yeah. As an extension of that, this would be reports that can provide an integrated view across your contracts. So this is a simple dashboard that can either be built on top of iCertis or using other products such as Power BI or Tableau, getting the data out of iCertis, but then providing details in a much more visual manner to say, what are all the contracts that have a certain type of payment obligation. Where do I have all the contract commitments, either by region, by country? So the slicing and dicing can be done because now you have the data managed effectively within the CLM solution. This is where you're pulling the data out of the contracts, embedded in the contracts, and essentially unleashing them for visual value. The third one that we talked about is again looking back in en masse across various contracts to immediately get a quick view in terms of what are the commitments. For example, in this case, what are the contracts with the force majeure clause? As I was giving an example with COVID and the pandemic, that would be a very simple scenario where people might want to get a bird's eye view in terms of contractual obligations without having to go through each and every single contract and looking through the documents one by one. And lastly, looking inside, you want to wrap that up?
Yeah, so this is this is an example of, on the right side here, what you're looking at is the type of data that could be included in a contract, right? Like beyond just what you see up front, there are various things like pricing tables, rate cards, SLA definitions. So you can run OCR on it, and all that'll do just by itself is when you do a search, maybe you do a search for something like senior consultant, as you can see on this right side in Appendix B, it might give you a list of contracts that have the word senior consultant in it. But I mean, you might have dozens, hundreds, or like many hundreds of contracts that have that. What do you do with that? How do you really utilize that? And what you see on the left there is within ICI, which is iCertis Contract Intelligence, ICI looking at the data within the contract, analyzing it, understanding that it's a table, and helping you catalog that table in real time when you're intaking the contract, along with updating the headers, putting in the values that have been discovered, just to give you an idea of, okay, we're talking about AI intakes contracts and does all this, but really what does that look like in the real world? This is what it looks like, taking unstructured data and making it more useful at scale.
All right. So we are at the end of our presentation over here. I think we discussed some of these aspects throughout the presentation. So with iCertis as an example, a lot of the capabilities that it provides allows you to take work through from data ingestion through negotiation through compliance and to providing better user experiences throughout. And everywhere there can be value that is realized from the data that is available in these contracts. Jean, any additional questions that we need to finally cover before we wrap up? And I'll put this marketing slide while we discuss this.
I have a forward-looking question for you guys. So in the technology space, we have moved from things that were very physical, like physical networks, physical servers, physical things, to virtual, to software-defined networks, software-defined infrastructure, in fact, even infrastructure as code. It seems to me that if we were going towards sort of the same, if we were taking the same trajectory for contracts, so instead of contract being written in English, but contract to be written as, smart contract, as code, then everything you just talked about would be much easier, it seems to me, because the data would be sort of native to the contract itself. So my question to you is, do you see this a starting trend in the industry? If not, why not? What are the blockers? I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, I can give a quick answer, and Josh, definitely please feel free to chime in. The trend is, towards that, right? Like people do want to make it more predictable and more consistent. And that is really what all of these standardizations are driving towards. That said, I would say the challenge in essentially getting towards the trend, especially with respect to contracts, is that there is a lot of contextuality that is associated with a particular contract. It is not just about the data, it is in the context in which you are providing that data that often has additional meaning that is layered on top of the contractual terms and conditions. That makes it a lot harder to essentially codify that in a quick and consistent manner, right? Like a single word and a single prefix or an adjective in a particular phrase can completely change the meaning of what your contractual obligations are, for example. And as time goes on, people are coming up with newer and innovative ways to get into contracts in the first place. So every time we think that there is consistency, suddenly somebody will come up with a completely different way of saying, hey, if you actually buy these products from me, then I'll pay you 5 years from now in this particular different way. I'll give you a house over there. Like all of those variations are harder to essentially quantify. And that's where the challenge is. And that's why the immediate trend is more towards AI and AI analytics that can essentially help from that particular perspective. But I do believe there is a future where things can become more standardized as people are realizing the value here.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. All right. Well, we need to leave it at that because we are running out of time. So I really want to thank you guys for a very interesting session on contracts and contract data. Track 6 has a 1-hour lunch break until 12:30. And after that, we are going to resume for a session on finding the needle in the data haystack. So I invite everyone to come back at 12:30, and you all enjoy your lunch. Sathya and George, again, thank you very much.
Thank you for attending, and hope you have a great day.